is my pleasure to welcome you and the speakers to the 16th Haskayne Hour. And today's topic is, what is a vibrant city? Is Calgary close? So for some of you who are new, Haskayne Hour is where we bring in a senior business leader and pair them with a researcher at the university and give you food for thought and also breakfast in 60 minutes. So today, our senior business leader is Mary Moran, who is the CEO and president of Calgary Economic Development, and she has been in that position for 6 years. She has an MBA from Royal Roads and has served on numerous not-for-profit boards in the cities. She's a consummate storyteller, and I know she will have some good stories for today. Our academic scholar is Kevin McQuillan, who has his PhD from Princeton, was involved in leadership positions at Western Ontario, and then recognized he needed to go west. So he was the Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Calgary and is currently serving as the Vice Provost Academic, and for the non-university types, that's a very senior position in the university. He is a demographer and studies changes in population trends and patterns and the factors that influence them. So I would like to welcome Kevin and Mary to the stage, and Kevin was going to start us off.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I'm very happy to be here this morning, and very happy in particular about the topic that we have chosen. I think all of us in the room here know that these have been some difficult years for Calgary recently. All of us, I'm sure, know people who've been affected by that in important ways, and I think it underlines for all of us the fact that we have a role to play in trying to move the city forward again and to improve the situation for all of our fellow citizens in Calgary. The first thought I just wanted to share with you is one that all great cities go through hard times. And sometimes we tend to forget that, I think, when we're looking at our own situation. But what we're experiencing, of course, is not something that others haven't gone through before or will go through again. And so I thought I'd start with just a few words about the situation of New York, a city that many of us feel probably among the most successful in the world. When I first went to New York, it was on my way to Princeton to start graduate school, and I can remember getting off the bus in New York City. I lived in Montreal at the time and took the Greyhound bus to New York, got off at the old 42nd Street bus terminal at the time, and was a little taken aback by what I saw in the city. These were tough times for what we think as the most successful city in the world, perhaps. And some of you are old enough may remember this famous headline that came out at the time. New York was on the verge of bankruptcy. In fact, bonds were coming due and they couldn't find anyone willing to refinance them. The mayor approached the president for help to bail out the city, and the president said no, and the New York Daily News turned that into that famous headline, "For the city dropped dead." It started a very difficult period in New York. Eventually, a recovery package was patched together, but it led to very, very serious problems, significant layoffs of police officers, teachers, and others in the city, and started the city really on a downward path. There's an example of a New York City subway car at the time, not especially appealing and not what it looks like today, certainly not what our C-train looks like in Calgary. But if we look at some of the data on the situation at the time, we can see what a difficult period it was, really stretching for about 20 years. With population declining significantly, over 800,000 people fleeing the city, the labor force shrinking, and at the same time, crime as a significant problem rising, with homicides doubling basically between 1970 and 1990. Things, of course, then began to turn around. The 1990s was a turning point for the city, and now when we think of New York, we think of it truly as being one of the great, successful, truly global cities in the world. And so I begin with that just to bring to mind the fact that times can be difficult everywhere, that even a couple of years can be very difficult for us. but that we need to think of the fact that things can move ahead and cities can turn around and go in a different direction. Preparing for this, I did a little bit of work, as demographers like to do, with some statistics from census bureaus and others on the situation in the United States. And the Canadian situation, as you know, is a little bit difficult to look at in that we have a very small number of large cities in Canada. We only have 6 with a population of 1 million or more. And they do tend to be very particular in terms of their vocations. I don't think any of us think of Calgary becoming a Montreal, for example. When we look at the situation in the United States, there's 57 cities that have a population of 1 million or more. When we look what's happened in recent years, there truly have been winners and losers. We've had some cities that have done exceptionally well, rapid growth, drawing population into the cities, and many that haven't. And the gap, I think, is becoming bigger over time. Some clearly stuck in a cycle of decline, population leaving, incomes falling, high rates of vacancies. Others have been moving forward, and many of us have visited the real success stories, the San Franciscos, the Bostons, and some others in the world. And so I guess my message then, before I pass it to Mary, is that times can get tough. Recovery is certainly possible, but recovery doesn't happen automatically. And it takes a real commitment from people in all walks of life within the city, people in government, people in business, people in the academic world, to try to help in terms of moving the city forward. And we'll talk a little bit about what we think that we can do on that.
Thanks very much, Kevin, and thanks for giving me more than my fair share of talk time, because people that know me know I love to talk. So, thanks to Haskayne for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to be here, and I just have to say, so far this audience is much better behaved than the audience I was in last night, which is with the audience for the open house with Trudeau. So hopefully you guys won't get as rowdy, but. I assume that I just press this to move forward. Great. See, I do know technology. So I'm really excited to be here, and I have to tell you that there's actually, Loren actually made one little mistake when she did the introduction to me, which is that I haven't actually been in this position for 6 years, because if I had, I should have fixed the economy by now. But I've actually been in this job for about 1.5 years, which was really good timing on my part. I always say that I'm sure my mother's looking down on me going, boy, if you will find a hard path, this time you've really outdone yourself. So it has been really challenging in my role. I've been with the organization for 6 years, and I would just say that although only in this position for 1.5 years, and I can say that hindsight is a brilliant science, because I think that we should have probably been doing a lot of things differently 6 years ago, and I would be the first to take some responsibility for that. But I think it's, we are where we are, and I think it was easy because we had rapid growth. And, to Kevin's point, I mean, we had 32% GDP growth in the decade leading up to 2014. And so economic development was a pretty easy job because people were knocking on the door. But I will just say our organization's gone through a dramatic cultural change with the changing times, and I would just say long-term we're very committed to what I would call diversification, or smart, purposeful diversification. When it comes to innovation, though, I think that we look at a lot of cities right now and do lots of comparisons. Not just we do, but also the media does. And we've learned a lot in the last 2 years, and some of the things that I just want to share with you, because I think it's really important to understand that there is hope for Calgary. And, I think the biggest part is that when we look at cities, particularly like New York or Boston or whatever the case may be, we look at what are the ingredients that help cities be more innovative, vibrant. And when you look at, all the great cities in the U.S. who have actually really advanced innovation, one of the key ingredients is they have great universities. And they also have knowledge-intensive industries. And so when you think about those two ingredients, we're really well set up, because U of C is a very good research university. And we also have a very knowledge-based population here. Now, a lot of people in the media, and I've been on TV and radio talking about this, is they make a comparison to Denver. Well, I had the great privilege of meeting with the mayor of Denver about just before Christmas, and I said to him, what was the big turnaround for you? And first of all, he reminded me that comparing Calgary to Denver is like comparing apples to kumquats. And it's really important to take note of that. And part of that is because the energy industry in Calgary is a much bigger player than Denver was. Denver is a regional provider of energy services. But you think about Calgary, this is a place where we have, or Alberta, we have 3 to 5% of world energy supply underfoot. Right? And we do 10 to 15% of world energy deal flow, or did 10 to 15% of world energy deal flow. And so he said to me, look, your job's way harder than ours was. There's no question about it. But he did say a couple of things that really resonated with me and gave me great hope. And the first thing he said to me was, we had a really smart population. We had a highly educated population. And part of the reason they went to Denver was quality of life because of our Rocky Mountain playground. I went, that's good, we have those. And when you think about that, you think about this downturn, it is way different than any other downturn. One, the energy industry is going through a structural change. This is not a cyclical change, right? And so we know that the energy industry, in order to compete in the increasingly fierce market share war, they have to be much more productive and efficient, but they also have to be innovative, and they need to get access to markets. But the energy industry here, and we see it in the downtown core, we're dealing with the real estate fallout of that right now with having 10 million square feet in the downtown core that is unoccupied right now, which is like a little city. Vancouver only has 13 million. But we haven't seen the mass exodus out of this city. We had 160,000 people move here from 2011 to 2015. 25,000 people moved here in the first year of the recession. And from July 2015 to June 2016, you know how many people left here? This is like a game, you guys. 6,000 people. That is it. And we expected in that time that 160,000 people to come here. We'd only have 80,000 that moved here. So our growth was much greater. And those people are coming from, 50% of them were coming from international markets, so they're not about to leave. So there's a much greater sense of attachment here. We still have a highly educated population, and they want to stay because of the lifestyle, right? So I kind of took comfort in what Denver said. And they said, and just, to make me feel better, I guess, is that, we have 30% office space vacancy in the downtown core. In the 80s, Denver had a 55% reported office space vacancy and what they would call 70%, including the shadow office space vacancy. And so I said, so what did you do? They said, well, we went out to jurisdictions that were in high growth mode, and we tried to attract satellite offices. And I went, hey, that's what we're doing. They said, well, that's the right thing to do, but I've got to tell you, Mary, you need a lot more patience than you have. And I said, why? He goes, because we didn't attract satellite offices. We were lucky if we attracted 2 or 3 people at a time. And he said, but that was the beginning of our tech sector. And that's what started to grow tech. But what else happened, he said, is we've triangulated private sector, government, and post-secondary, which was critical to our growth. And by the way, we also started acting like a region as opposed to a city. So it wasn't about Denver, it was about Denver and Boulder, which is exactly what Calgary and Edmonton need to do, in spite of the hockey. And I'm not going to tell you I'm an Edmonton Oilers fan, but I am. I cheer for the Flames, by the way. But that we need to work better together, right? And so that's really where the juncture that we are in right now, as far as I'm concerned. But I would also say that what's notably different between Denver in the 80s and Calgary in, what year is this? 2017, is that technology isn't a sector anymore. Technology is laid across all sectors. And so when we think about Calgary and its growth, we really need to think what I call the tall and the weeds, right? We need to create a stronger ecosystem in innovation that allows us to grow the tall things, so our core sectors, so whether that be energy, fossil fuels, renewables, logistics, financial services, arts and culture, we need to, the creative industries, we need to let those things grow because those are our strengths. We're not about to abandon them. We'd be ridiculous to leave $100 billion of value underfoot. I mean, that's absurd when the energy demand is growing and we need all forms of energy. But we also need to allow the weeds to come up. And the weeds are really about things that we probably didn't predict, high-tech companies, new products and new services. And we need to have the ecosystem that lets those things not only survive here in Calgary, but thrive in Calgary. And so, I'm not the innovation expert. I've worked in very competitive industries that tend to be innovative, like the airline industry. I mean, we are the home of WestJet, which was a very innovative product when it first came out. I worked in wireless, so on the wireless side of TELUS for many years. And I've watched that the innovation that was required in an intense market share war. But Pete Garrett of Innovate Calgary is a much greater expert than I am. But Pete and I stand shoulder to shoulder on this, and we understand that innovation goes across sector. It's not one person's job; it's everybody's job. But when everybody started talking to me about this, I kept thinking, God, it feels like we have all the ingredients to be innovative in this city, but it just feels like we don't have a recipe. So my niece is in the audience. She knows I like to cook. So I tried to create my own recipe. And because I'm a marketer, I said, well, I only know the 4 Ps of marketing, so I'm going to put those into innovation. And when you really, and part of it was because I was hearing this innovation, the people in innovation, and I was hearing the government, and they were talking different languages. And so I had to put it in my simple way into a language that I thought both audiences would understand. So when you think about innovation, you really got to think about some key ingredients. And so I'm going to walk you through what I call the 5 Ps, and then I'm going to tell you I'm wrong. But it's not that I'm wrong, it's just that there's a better way of describing it. But if you really think about what we need for innovation and to be the most innovative city, we need people. And this is about talent. We need to have the talent that wants to come here because we're an innovative city. So we have that highly educated. The question would be now, do they have the right skills to advance innovation? Because a lot of them have been working in the energy industry, potentially could have gone into high tech, opted to go into work for Synovus, implement SharePoint for $150,000 a year and have Fridays off and maybe a parking spot, right? That's actually not the type of people that work in high tech, right? Did they lose some skills? They might have. So the question really short term is do we have the right skills for those people? And the long-term question is that do we have the skills for the new economy, which is making sure that everybody's prepared to work for a technology company?
Mary, I wonder if I could just underline a point on that. People, of course, is demography, which is my area. One of the things that surprised me...
That's why I like you, Kevin.
Yeah. One of the things that surprised me looking at the situation in the United States is that some of the most successful cities are not really growing that rapidly. It's really not about fast growth in terms of numbers. It's really about attracting the right people into the cities with the correct skills, with both work and educational background. I'm glad you raised the point about immigration because we've seen an amazing change in Calgary, indeed in Canada over the last number of years. For a long time, our concern about immigration was everybody went to Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. 75% of immigrants used to settle in one of those 3 cities. We've seen a tremendous change in recent years. I just checked some figures last night. Between 2006 and 2015, number of international immigrants settling in Calgary went from about 11,000 to almost 22,000. So almost doubling during that period of time. And we've seen in both Vancouver and Toronto declines in the numbers of people who are settling. Obviously still big magnets. But I think it shows the changed image of Calgary and our ability to attract from around the world. And the one other point that I always want to add on this, one of the most interesting pieces of social science research I've seen recently is about the success of the children of immigrants in school. Canada may be the only country in the world where the children of immigrants actually do better in terms of educational achievement than native-born Canadians. And some of that has been, of course, our selection of immigrants. I think also our very good educational system. But those, I think, are really the keys around the people side of things.
I agree. And if you talk to, if you talk about the characteristics of, an innovative ecosystem or the people, the characteristics of the people in an innovation ecosystem. They always talk about that, highly educated, multicultural. And part of it, the multicultural is they bring a world perspective, right? So I think that that's really important. I'm just going to keep going through these P's really quickly because I know we have about 12 minutes. And so the programs is really about learning, right? This is about learning from mentors. This is about learning in post-secondary, but it's also about below post-secondary. So if you think about our society, we haven't really created a society for people to fail quickly and move on, which is required for innovation. So if we have very much a red ribbon society, which means, Johnny's got to get an A in grade 4, and we got to put a red ribbon on him, and he's got to win the track meet, and he's got to do all this. And we really haven't taught kids how to fail. And frankly, I'd love to see, the curriculum in education from 0 to 12 actually change and actually reward people for failing, because that's going to make them more innovative. Failing fast is actually a really important part about being innovative. So I think there's some work to do there. So I would assess, not just Calgary, but Canada really quite low on this. When it comes to places, this is really important too, right? Because if you think about our city right now and our 10 million square feet of office space in the downtown core, there are a lot of people that have been displaced from the energy industry that are hanging a shingle out in their house or their garage, their cabin, a whole bunch of things trying to create. But they want to be with like-minded people. And we've got these big floor plates in the downtown core. So we've been working with the real estate industry to say, hey, what can you do? Because they, first of all, don't want to ride up an elevator bank with 6 people if they're a company of innovation, because they want people to collide, right? They don't want, success isn't for particularly people in high tech or the millennials. Success isn't getting a cubicle or an office or office by a window. It's sitting at a table with 10 other people with earphones on, and we play ping pong during lunch and maybe have Scotch hour on Friday afternoons, which sounds pretty good to me, by the way. But, so we're not, our office space in the downtown core isn't really set up for creating innovative spaces. And so we've been bringing innovators and real estate community together to say, hey, what can we do? How can we break down those big floor plates and start to create places and spaces? And I can tell you, I'm working with about 7 different organizations right now. 2 have already started up that are creating incubators and accelerators and co-chair space in the downtown core. Doesn't mean that Innovate Calgary's space at the university isn't important, because that is. It's really important to have a space that's close to the university for commercialization that's coming out of the university and others, but there's also a need for other spaces. So I'm encouraged that we're making some progress, but again, I learned from Denver saying, this isn't a silver bullet. It's not a short road you're taking, it's a long road. I want to talk about policies a little bit, because policies are really important, and in my mind, the gatekeeper to helping innovation, because you can do all the other things. You can educate your people, you can attract people, you can create these incubators, accelerators, and co-shared space, but if you don't have policy to attract capital or immigrants, then you're in big trouble. And so we're walking the government, the current provincial government, through, you need to have a leadership role in this with respect to, so they just implemented a 30% tax credit recently, $90 million pot of money to say, hey, here's an innovation tax credit. But to me, this is not a one and done. This is the beginning of policies that should be created to attract capital into this market. Because we know in this market, getting share of wallet away from the energy industry has historically been really, really tough. And even with all the wealth in this city, getting the people that are wealthy here in Calgary to invest into tech companies or innovation has been really tough. And I just want to make a side note to that, or footnote to that, is that I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that I don't think the energy industry is not innovative, because I think they are. I do think they do large-scale innovation that has been really important for advancing. But we've also had some amazing financial tools that has attracted capital into that energy industry to help it grow, including things like flow-through shares that have allowed the juniors to grow quite aggressively, and also for them companies to invest in innovation. So policies, to me, is a key piece that the government needs to play leadership role. I want to talk about promotion because I'm a marketer, but I have to tell you, every time I have a conversation about innovation, people say the exact same thing, which is we need to tell our story better. And I couldn't agree more, because there's actually really cool innovation in the energy industry, and there's really cool innovation happening outside of the energy industry. And I keep saying to people, including our minister, federal minister of finance, I actually kind of find it embarrassing that you actually call Toronto Waterloo the innovation corridor, because there's way more science-based population here, and there's been some really cool things happening. But it is true, we haven't told their story very much. Everybody kind of looks to my organization and say, well, you're the promotional arm for Calgary, but I don't know if any of you have seen me on Stephen Avenue Mall trying to raise money to tell Calgary's story, but it's a frequent event that happens at lunchtime, because we're a small organization. It's everybody's responsibility to tell this story about Calgary and learn about what are the cool things that are going on here. So we can do our part, and we're working hard to do it, to change the perceptions of Calgary, but we need to do a lot more. So my 5 Ps, this is how I explain it. Pete Garrett will tell you that when he started to educate me on innovation, I had to categorize everything and whatever, but it was a framework that worked for me. But we're further along than my framework or my recipe. And there's been a really good advancement that's happened here in the last 6 months, which I'm so encouraged about. And it is the framework of the rainforest. And this rainforest is an approach that looked at Silicon Valley and said, what are all the assets? What's the recipe for Silicon Valley that made it so successful, that would apply to other jurisdictions? That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to become the high-tech center or we're going to become the next Silicon Valley, but how can jurisdictions who want to be ready for the new economy and overlay technologies and innovations across their key sectors and let other things grow up, what is the framework that they need? And the framework was described as the resources, the people, the culture, but I'm going to come back to that, the role models, so having people you can learn from that have done it before or done it in the industry or outside the industry, the activities, engagements, so that's about the programming, the other P, the framework, which is infrastructure. It's like, do we have the right places, but it's also policies, the leadership, so do we have politicians or leaders in industry standing up and say, we are going to be the most innovative center. So I want to focus on leadership and culture. Culture, the Rainforest Group is trying to drive this right now. So we have about 100 people who have signed a social contract that have said, we are committed, because historically we've had very fragmented innovation ecosystem here. Nobody's fault, it's just the state that we were in. But we really need to create a culture of trust. We need to do a lot more sharing. With innovation and technology, this is everybody's game, and we're going to be way better at it if we work better together on it. So I'm really encouraged by this. People are now, the energy industry, starting to come into this Rainforest Group. And so to me, this framework is starting to drive the culture. When it comes to leadership, I still think that there needs somebody to be banging on the table or with a spoon to say, hey, we're this. Because I'm a big believer that brand can often lead culture. So if somebody, and this is what the mayor of Denver told me, he said, leadership is so important when we made our changes. Because soon as the mayor or premier got up and said, we are going to be this, people started investing in it. And they followed that leadership. So I think that there's some work that we as a community, both Calgary and Alberta, need to do with respect to that. I guess I just called my boss out too. So, I think that, I'm really encouraged with what's going on here. And part of that's as a result of the work and the changes Innovate Calgary are making. Some of it's because some of the work and the changes that the university is doing and some of the grants that they're attracting in research. But I'm also really encouraged because the one thing in my job is I get to look at all sectors. And there are so many cool kids in this city right now, many who have returned from Waterloo or Toronto or from Silicon Valley who have said, I want to help the innovation ecosystem. And I look at some of these companies, and this is only just a beginning of a list. My staff told me, you can't put all of them on there, Mary. But there's way more that we know, and there's such great things that are happening here. So you're seeing the weeds start to come up. But these people, most of them will say, the last 10 years haven't been easy for me. I have survived here, but I haven't thrived the way that I would have liked to have, or as early as I would have liked to have. But some of them, like some of these companies are doing business with Fortune 500 companies. So the question being is Calgary an innovative city? I would say yes, we have all the ingredients, but we still need to work on the recipe. There's a lot of cool things happening here. I'm encouraged by it. We're chipping away at it. It is a long road. And as Denver said, look, it was a 30-year project for us to become more innovative and to be a technology center. But, so I'll come back after I retire, go to the nursing home, die, go to heaven, and then I'll come back and see how we're doing. So,
thanks, Mary. I just want to finish up because I think we're anxious to get to the question and answer section. But I wanted to talk just a little about another example beyond the Denver one, where I think we've seen some really tremendous change. And it's the example of Pittsburgh, and one of the reasons I like about it is that Pittsburgh is somewhat in the same size range as Calgary in terms of population. It's a little bit bigger, but not hugely so. It's a little bit isolated. It's not part of the corridor we see, say, in California or on the northeast of the United States, where one city almost runs into another. So in some ways, a good model for us in a city that was built, as we have been around energy, very much around one industry in the old days, and that was steel. And so I show you this picture of what was called the Homestead Steel Works in Pittsburgh, which in 1946 had 20,000 employees working at that plant. That's the same site in 1998, totally gone. Steel production had basically come to an end in the Pittsburgh area. And what were the consequences? The consequences were a very, very difficult period of time for that city as an industry it had relied on for so long literally collapsed. Between 1979 and 1987, 133,000 manufacturing jobs were lost in the Pittsburgh and the surrounding area. But as you can see, after, again, a period of time, as Mary was saying on the Denver situation, it doesn't happen overnight. After a period of time, the city began to rebound and has become one of the great success stories in terms of resurgence in what's sometimes been called the Rust Belt. New York Times did a big feature article on Pittsburgh as potentially a model for many other cities across North America.
By the way, I went there.
Good.
Did I tell you that?
You did tell me that.
I would say that they didn't reinvent themselves once, but twice. Right?
And I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah.
One of the things that's striking is sometimes I think when we think about building a new Calgary, we sometimes have the feeling it means going out and stealing other people's industry. But really rebuilding on the great strength that we already have here is the primary one. We're not going to turn away anybody who wants to come, but building on the industries that have been successful here, but working in new ways. And that's certainly been true in the Pittsburgh case. What struck me is how they were able to retain the head offices of a number of companies, including U.S. Steel, who produces no steel in the Pittsburgh area anymore, but does so all over the world, and yet is centered in Pittsburgh. The other thing, and I'm glad Mary pointed this out, because coming from the university, I'm always a little reluctant to emphasize the importance of the university connection, but it shows up right across the world, not just in North America, but in Europe and in Asia as well. The great partnerships that can spring up. Another thing that Mary mentioned, I think really important, coming relatively new to Alberta in 2007, I was always struck by this weird Edmonton-Calgary competition, antagonism kind of thing, which we see at the university as well, U of C, the U of A, and so on. One of the great things I loved in the Pittsburgh example is how competing universities came together and shared their strengths. Carnegie Mellon, one of the great engineering schools in North America, University of Pittsburgh, a range of strengths, but particularly in the area of health. And that has driven a major, major sector in the Pittsburgh economy and allowed them to attract Bayer's major research campus to the Pittsburgh area. And so part of that has meant, and of course it's a two-way street, they've attracted people, which is health industry, and as industry has grown, more young people like to come. Pittsburgh, this is a pretty focused statistics, of course, looking at young people 25 to 34, but it has the highest percentage of people in that age category with either a graduate or professional degree, up there with the Bostons and the San Franciscos and other great stories that are out there. And finally, while they have grown slowly, as I said before, the overall population growth in the city has not been large, but what they have been successful at doing is attracting a lot of young people into the city. And while those of us a little older hope that we still have something to contribute as our city moves ahead, I think we all know that the future will be tied to bringing bright, successful young people into the city. So let me stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, both Kevin and Mary. We are going to turn it over to Q&A, but because I'm the moderator, I get to ask the first two questions. Okay, so the first question I have is for you, Kevin. And one of the things we never really talked about, we said, is Calgary a vibrant city? And I think there's more than technology to make a vibrant city. So do you have thoughts on the role of the arts, and maybe what role does the university play in building the arts in a vibrant city?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and many of you, if not read, at least familiar with the works of people like Richard Florida and so on, who talked about the importance of the creative class. I think one of the things that we see, and one of the things that certainly will help us attract well-educated young people, is the ability to offer a really diverse cultural experience within the city. We're helped, I think, as Mary was saying, by our proximity to the mountains and all that brings along. I'm struck how often when we're recruiting at the university, when we ask, what made you think about Calgary? The first thing that people say is, yeah, I'm a real skier. Just great to come to Calgary. But I think the city itself, in my view, is already a vibrant place. I live in the downtown area. I'm struck by how many people are out on the streets all the time. Even in a tougher time, our restaurants and so on are still doing remarkably well. But I think we have a ways to go on the cultural side. We have a vibrant fine arts program at the university. We have programs in music and in drama, in dance. We haven't brought them out into the community as much as we should. I think a question for us is we often do things on the campus, but our campus is a little bit isolated, not far from the downtown, but a little bit isolated. And I found it's often hard to draw people up to the campus. And I think we need to move out beyond our walls to work with the other cultural institutions in town and to offer the range of activities that I think will be very important to those who live here, but also to those who might want to come and live here.
Thank you. Mary, as I was listening to your description of what we've got here as a recipe, I was wishing we had invited Justin this morning, but somehow we missed out on that one. But I think what you do is you paint a very exciting picture of building a diverse economy. So my question for you is, will it destroy the city if the price of oil skyrockets?
That's a really good question. So I would say, to set the record straight, I'm not an economist, but I would say from a talent pool perspective, it has been tough historically. But I would just say, and I think this is a really important point because, I talked about the structural change that's happened in the energy industry, and they've, their number one customer has become their number one competitor, and there's a lot of really good things happening in the U.S. in spite of their president. That will advance the energy industry there. And so, and even, if you look at capital that for Calgary-based companies, a lot of it has shifted to the U.S. over the last few years because of both politically and also pipeline uncertainty. And so, I would just say that, I think from a talent pool perspective, that risk is getting less and less and less the longer this goes on. But I can tell you from trying to attract companies here, that is their biggest concern. Two concerns. One is that labor pool will flight back to the energy industry when it comes back. My answer to that is that I don't think it's going to come back the way it did, because this is a structural change. And if you look at that intense market share war that is getting more and more fierce, is those companies have to remain lean. A lot of them reduced their operating costs by 30 to 50%, which resulted in painful layoffs and downsizing of their real estate space. So I would say the risk is much less now than it even was in the 80s of it coming right back, right? So even if we are fortunate enough to get pipelines and we're fortunate enough to get $80 oil and the price of gas increases, I don't think they're going to add labor the way that they have before. So, but I will say this, is that when you talk to technology companies, and when we're talking about technology around innovation, is that a lot of the high-tech companies are saying right now that they're actually hiring. And part of their challenge right now with the people, they'll interview people in Calgary, they'll interview somebody from Waterloo, they'll interview somebody from Victoria. And a lot of them will say, look, it's not actually hard skills that I'm making the decision on, because if you're a coder or a programmer, a lot of them can learn on the job, right? But if I'm a project manager, which is a skill that you can, with adaptation, it is transferable into high tech, they say, the problem is we don't hire them because they're not coming with the same enthusiasm. So they're used to earning a certain wage, which is not available in high tech. So if you were making $200,000, you'll be lucky if you're making 65, and you got to work a lot of long hours. Like a lot of these tech people will say, look, I go in on Monday, and I'm lucky if I come out on Friday. The good news is they let me take my dog to work, right? but you know, so there's a really a mentality shift, and I can tell you I've addressed unemployed people in the city a lot over the last year, and it's probably one of the hardest things that I do. But it really is about, we've got to make a shift about, there are opportunities here in Calgary. It's not the 25 or 30,000 that we need to get people back, all the people back to work and get down to 4.5% unemployment again. But the reality is there are companies that are growing here that are in the tech industry, but they're not necessarily hiring out of the energy industry because we haven't made this shift about expectations, right? So long term, it might pay off the same. But the reality is in the short term, particularly startups, you got to grind it out, right? So you know, the labor pool issue is been the biggest hurdle that the energy industry has prevented us from diversifying into other industries. But I would just say now it's not necessarily that; it's more about can they make the mental adjustment? This is a different work environment.
Okay, thank you. So we'll open it to Q&A. Now, the process is put up your hand if you have a question, and there will be a roving mic that will come to you. Has somebody got a question? Okay. Sherry, okay.
Hi, it's Allison from Telespark, and I wanted to propose one more P. I was trying to come up with a P for the phrase, and I came up with pain. And I'm wondering how, pain, ouch, pain.
Ouch.
And I'm wondering how important a sense of urgency is to catalyzing innovation.
Yeah, yeah.
I would say it's tremendously important for innovation in almost any sector. I don't quote me on this outside of this room, I often think there's not enough pain at the university. We live a life that doesn't have the ups and downs that many of you experience in other elements of work and business. I think it really does push change, and even within the university context, I've seen it. The one thing that does impact is falling enrollment, and when we see falling enrollment in particular areas, we respond. And amazingly, sometimes faculty members come up with whole new ideas about new courses, of new ways of teaching courses on campus. But I agree. I think many of us, as an element of human nature, fall into a very convenient pattern of doing the same thing over and over again, and why not if it's working? But when things change, when we feel that pain, it creates a sense of urgency that I think drives innovation.
I would agree. And I think if you talk to any entrepreneur, right, they talk about what they learned in the trough of darkness or the valley of death, right? And I think that is driven them to be more innovative, right? And I think that's the value of having an intense market share war, right? Regardless of the industry you're in, right? Is that you're always trying to get better, right? And so even the energy industry, who's done amazing things, is that they have to really be cognizant of not becoming the Model T Ford with the innovation they have done so well in, right? What's the next thing that we need to do, and how can we, and you know, whether that be around a cleaner fossil fuel or lower emission fossil fuel or what wind or solar or whatever the case may be. I'm a believer of the end conversation, not the or conversation. You know, we have to continue to invest in innovation, and so it's being done. You know, I'm an impatient person, so it never happens fast enough for me. So, but I think that's the pain has prevented us. So back to Loren's question, as you know, has the energy industry, well, we had things pretty good for a long time. And so we didn't feel the pain, and we're feeling the pain right now. And I'd even say, even in our organization, it was easy to answer the door. It's really a lot more difficult to go out and hunt business, which is the situation we're in right now, right? So.
Okay, thank you. Colin, I think you have a question?
Good morning, Colin Jackson. I'd love to push you a little harder on this whole notion of leadership, where it's going to come from, what our role within that could and should be. So I think...
Are you trying to get me fired, Colin?
I'm going to get you fired. No, come on. That's what you do. The notion of a culture of innovation, I think, is tremendously exciting, and I think we'd all agree we have pockets of innovation in this city. The conditions for a great meal, again, I agree, are here, but they're also here in 10 to 100 to 300 or 400 cities around the world, depending upon how you assess those. It's nothing particularly unique about that list to Calgary. The secret in the Julia Child, if you like, in the process in Pittsburgh, as you would know, was Mayor Murphy, who was able to stand up, stand tall, and lead difficult change in the face of great opposition. In the case of New York, it was a combination of the private citizens and industry who wanted to restore their city, meeting political leadership, eventually Bloomberg and others. And again, they drove through. In other places, universities, post-secondaries, have a significant centering role in consolidating ambition, speaking well into it, and encouraging others to be part of that. I don't see any one of those three here. And Mary, your point about political leadership is, I think, a little thin, because we get the politicians we wish. The political debate we have just now, provincially, and it will be probably in the fall municipally, is all about cost efficiency. It's not about this.
I know.
So we, the citizens, are allowing a debate which is about how cheaply we can do it, not how well. Finish with an example. The Peace Bridge appears in all of your and tourism's and others' promotional materials as a symbol of the new Calgary. Friends, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when Drew Farrell was championing that, she had the hell kicked out of her by us. And she wasn't defended. I asked her actually a few weeks ago if she'd ever been thanked for the Peace Bridge. Zero. So I'm not sure we actually are friendly to a culture of innovation. And whether we are or not, where is the leadership going to come from? What's our piece within that?
Is that for me, Colin, that question? You were looking at me. So I agree with you 100%. So I'm going to step cautiously here, but try to make my point. So I think leadership is going to come from a couple of places, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. I want to just talk about Pittsburgh and New York really quickly. New York is a great example. And so Kevin showed a lot of the stats, right? I mean, they were in the doldrums, right? It's exactly the time I Love New York was created. And so everybody kind of went, there was like garbage in the streets, people were on strike, crime everywhere, and and a politician said, on the back of a napkin, you know what, I just think we just got to I love New York so much, I just think we got to tell people about it. And I Love New York was created. And so the politician stood up and said, hey, we're going to tell everybody we love New York, and and people were lined up to say, yeah, well, tell my story, right? And it was really, the brand started to change the culture, but it was actually driven by political people, right? And so, and similar, Tom Murphy, as you know, of Pittsburgh, I've been on panels with him, and theirs was very much about placemaking. And I've been in Pittsburgh, I've ridden around with taxi drivers for days in there, and some people love him and some people hate him, but he stood up and said, we're investing in infrastructure, which is exactly what the mayor of Denver said. We are investing in infrastructure, right? We're going to build arenas, we're going to build stadiums, we're going to focus on areas that we think are really important, which is what government can do, right? And particularly to get people back to work. And he, in the downtown, said, and by the way, we're going to convert some of these buildings into residential. They converted 25, by the way, to try to create a much more vibrant downtown core. In that river district that Kevin showed, they started to build things, a river pathway, et cetera. So I do believe, and look at Austin, for example. Somebody stood up and said, hey, Austin, let's tell everybody we're weird. And they started doing music, arts and culture played a big part, technology. Look, Austin gets more VC money than most major cities in the US now into high tech, right? And so they stood up and they said, we're going to be this, right? And so I think there is a big role. And even British Columbia yesterday announced, that the president of UBC, I think it was, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the president of UBC and the premier stood up and said, we're going to be the most innovative province, right? So there is a role. Now, in fairness, in Alberta, it's been difficult because we've had a change of government at the It's dramatic change of government at the provincial level. We had a change of government at the federal level, and so it's a hard job for just a city to take on, but I do think we need leaders, both politically, in post-secondary and industry, to stand up and say, who are we trying to be, right? And, you know, we can do so much as Calgary Economic Development, but I think we have to work, and this, to me, is going to be the year that we make that decision. So, at that.
Okay. Kevin?
I just add very briefly, I support everything Mary said.
Except
I always worry if we put too much weight on government and political leadership. And maybe it's by many years in the university, but it always translates me into bureaucracy, and particularly in the Canadian setting. We set up a national innovation corporation. There'll be, well, how much has to go to Quebec versus Alberta versus Nova Scotia? We'll have endless pages of regulations that we have to follow in terms of applying for grants and so on. So I think political leadership is a really important part of what we need, and I think it has to cut across the sectors of our society. I think university presidents, mayors, councillors, representatives from the province, from the federal government have to be out front. But I think leaders of our broader civic society have to be involved in that too. And I think really sending that message that we're all in this together, that it really does take a level of cooperation among people and across institutions for us to be successful.
And there is work being done in this area. I think we're better than we were even 12 months ago, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and it's at the back there. Or, I'm sorry, over here.
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Abe Brown. I'm the Executive Director of In From the Cold, and so kind of speaking as part of the nonprofit sector, what are some of the, you know, because a lot of our talk today has been about innovation in the for-profit sector, which is great. What are you seeing in Calgary with respect to innovation in the not-profit sector, and what can we do to foster more innovation, particularly in that sector?
So, Kevin, can I just step in?
Yeah.
I think this is where the universities play a really key role. Sorry, Kevin, I'm going to do my...
No, that's
okay.
good.
And even now, as we're plotting our strategy, one of the things we want to do is really build a student body who is thinking about social innovation and connected to the different social issues in the city and building innovative solutions for that. Now, Kevin, do you have anything?
Well, I would just say often when we first think of nonprofit, I think we tend to think of important services for people who are really struggling in the city, and that's a critical part of the nonprofit. The nonprofit is such a big area. I mean, I think of things, again, around arts, around sports, and so on, where nonprofit agencies really play a big role in that. And I think as we can stimulate our students to be involved in that kind of work and others in the community, it really does help us to create that vibrant and attractive community. In fact, I was amazed when I came to Calgary at the level of public involvement in so many organizations that really promote a wide range of activities that make Calgary an attractive place to be.
And if I can just respond to it, I would just say, you know, for us, for Calgary Economic Development, it is, I'm going to answer this more around the people, which is really what many of the nonprofits have to deal with, right? And so for us, we had a really dramatic change when we created the economic strategy for Calgary, which wasn't our strategy, by the way. It was input from, you know, 500 business members, community members, young and old, cross-sectoral, not young and old, young and seasoned, and across sectoral, and they basically, it was interesting to me to see the swing or the shift that was happening way back in 2013, 2014 on the concern around the social issues. So, you know, we created a strategy that was really about conventional economic development, business attraction and retention and investment attraction and investment, people investment and attraction, but there was a lot more around shared prosperity. And, you know, that is, even in this downturn, continues to be a focus for our organization as well as the organizations that we work with. And so, you know, I think I'm encouraged with what all the post-secondaries are doing, not just the University of Calgary, but Mount Royal has played a very active part in social innovation. And we've done a lot in ensuring that any marginalized population, even in this downturn, is helped to navigate the system, right, in Calgary to try to get job placement, whatever that may be. So we have a really strong connector program where we take populations such as, new grads, which are marginalized right now, right, Aboriginal, new immigrants, people that are in poverty, and also disabled people, and we're trying to connect them into the networking system in Calgary that happens so commonly if you're in the system, right? And trying to get them into job placement. So we've been operating it for 2 years now. Last year we had double the amount of work placements that we were able to do across those populations. And so, that was an innovative program. It was a simple thing to say, hey, you don't know how to network in the system. We're going to help you, right? And then I would just say to the nonprofits, I think that there's a lot of things that you can do together, right, as opposed to things that are apart. Poverty reduction is a great thing, where historically there's been, people are working on poverty kind of like this, but the overall awareness of poverty isn't really strong. People don't understand, and you can see it in decisions like secondary suites. It's like, what? I don't understand. You don't want 5 cars parked outside your driveway, but you've got 5 cars, because, and believe me, I've been thrown out of dinner parties because of these conversations, but I'm not invited anywhere anymore. But the point being is that I think it's hard for city councillors to get these things through because people don't understand poverty, and part of it is because everybody's trying to deal with it this way. So the Enough for All strategy is great, where it's bringing people together, and the poverty reduction initiative was launched in the fall this year, but we still have to do more like that. So I think there's an opportunity for you also to be innovative, not just the post-secondaries and organizations like ourselves. So,
thank you.